History may wear a crown, but it rarely wears innocence. Behind every jeweled diadem and polished coat of arms there are shadows, long, creeping shadows that stretch across centuries, whispering truths too scandalous to inscribe on royal scrolls. In the heart of 15th century Castile, a tall, flaxen-hailed king named Enrique IV ascended the throne, hailed as noble, but soon infamous for something more shameful. They called him El Impotente. The impotent. It wasn't a metaphor. Court chroniclers, gossiping nobles, and even foreign envoys spoke of his failure to consummate 2 marriages. His first queen, Blanca of Navarre, was said to have remained a virgin for over 13 years. The royal court, ever desperate to verify its monarch's potency, posted scribes outside the bedchamber. Their quills never scratched parchment. The silence from within became a roar outside. Enrique blamed dark forces, witchcraft, curses, anything but biology. But the throne doesn't care for excuses. After annulling the barren union, Enrique married again, this time to the strikingly beautiful Juana of Portugal. Hope returned, briefly, though not without desperation. Enrique drank exotic elixirs brewed from bull's testicles, porcupine quills, and the blood of black roosters. Medieval aphrodisiacs blended with the blind faith of a man at war with his own body. He turned to a Jewish physician, known more for experimentation than subtlety. What followed was a primitive attempt at artificial insemination, centuries ahead of its time, and equally questionable in execution. Then, miraculously, a daughter was born. She was named Juana, but the court renamed her La Beltraneja, after Beltrán de la Cueva, a dashing courtier rumored to be far more intimate with the queen than Enrique ever was. The baby bore no resemblance to her supposed father. Whispers became war cries, nobles muttered of bastardy, betrayal, and dynastic decay. Juana later bore 2 sons, this time by the nephew of a bishop. With every child, the throne cracked further. Civil war erupted. Castile trembled under the weight of scandal. But in this chaos a new power emerged. Isabella, Enrique's half-sister, iron-willed and politically lethal. Where Juana faltered, with the queen than propriety or royalty would allow. Her hair, her eyes, the confident tilt of her chin. They bore little resemblance to Enrique and everything of Beltrán. Courtiers whispered, nobles schemed, and legitimacy dissolved like parchment in fire. But the scandal didn't end there. Queen Juana would later bear not 1 but 2 more sons, neither of them Enrique's. Their father, a bishop's nephew, young, ambitious, and conveniently placed within the palace. By then, the crown was crumbling under the weight of humiliation. The nobility revolted, branding the queen an adulteress and her children illegitimate. The Castilian court, always a delicate web of bloodlines and betrayals, collapsed into civil war. Amid the chaos, Enrique's quiet, calculating half-sister stepped forward. Her name was Isabella. She bore no scandals, no bastards, no whispers, only ambition. With a gaze sharp enough to carve thrones, she seized power and married Ferdinand of Aragon, uniting 2 kingdoms into one empire that would go on to reshape the world. Juana, once queen, faded into obscurity, her daughter forced to live a life defending a crown she never truly owned. Meanwhile, Isabella and Ferdinand sent Columbus west, lit the fires of the Inquisition, and etched their names into the stone of history. But at the heart of that legacy lies a scandal, a broken king, a rebellious queen, and a daughter born in the shadow of doubt. Now across the channel, the air grows colder, the fog thickens. We are in England, 15th century, a land where royal legitimacy wasn't just a formality, it was life or death. A single rumor could raise armies or bury dynasties. In 1442, inside a stone keep in Rouen, Normandy, a child was born to Cecily Neville, Duchess of York. He was named Edward, but from his first cry, whispers surrounded his cradle. His father, Richard, Duke of York, was far from Sicily's side, fighting the endless 100 Years' War in France. His absence during the time of conception was an inconvenient truth that would one day become a weapon. The boy, Edward, grew tall, towering over his peers. He had golden hair, radiant skin, and a broad, heroic frame. But this was not the York look. Richard and Cecily's other sons were dark-haired and short, bearing the stamp of their lineage. Edward looked foreign, divine. Some said he looked more like a Scandinavian warrior than a son of York. A different father? An archer? A knight? No one knew. No one dared ask. Not yet. Edward would grow into a king, charismatic, bold, and war-hardened. He seized the crown during the bloody Wars of the Roses, but his rule was forged in fire, and his lineage always hung by a thread. His enemies, especially the Lancastrians, whispered constantly that he was a bastard, that he had no right to wear the crown. Even his own cousin, the infamous Richard III, would later use those doubts to stake his own claim. The tragedy? It worked. Decades later, when Richard took the throne, he did so by branding Edward's children illegitimate, accusing Edward not just of adultery, but of never being royal at all. Edward IV, the mighty Yorkist lion, was reimagined as a golden-hailed fraud. But scandal is a blade that cuts deeper when wielded against the innocent, because Edward's supposed illegitimacy meant that his sons, the princes in the Tower, were no longer heirs. When they vanished within the cold stone walls of the Tower of London, their fate sealed by a mystery still unsolved. It was more than murder. It was erasure. If Edward was no king, then his sons were no princes. Their blood was nothing. History has never found their bones. Only silence remains. Yet the tale grows darker still, because royal blood, once tainted, poisons everything it touches. Across Europe, bloodlines were considered sacred. But time and again, kings and queens betrayed their beds, fell prey to lust, vengeance, or necessity, and in doing so they rewrote succession with every lie told beneath velvet sheets. One such lie was whispered in the royal halls of Sweden. Gustav III, King of Sweden in the 18th century, was a monarch obsessed with art, enlightenment, and legacy, but not with his queen. Their marriage was cold, publicly polite, privately desolate. For nearly a decade, their union produced no heir. The court grew restless. Ministers murmured, enemies sharpened their knives. Then, one night, an awkward solution was devised. The king's doctor, a man named Monk, was summoned to perform a duty far beyond medicine. He was to assist the king in producing an heir. That assistance included everything from instruction to participation. The line between science and sin blurred, and suddenly the queen was pregnant. 9 months later, a boy was born. But whose child was he? The king's? The doctor's? No one could say. Gustav doted on the boy, but the court whispered of Monk's visits, of locked doors and reddened cheeks. The scandal never broke officially, but it festered. And Gustav, already politically embattled, fell victim to assassination. His son would rule, but the stain of uncertainty never left the throne. Once again, a kingdom was built upon a question, but questions in royal bloodlines do not simply vanish. They metastasize, they become myths, accusations, and sometimes revolutions. As we move forward through the cracked mirrors of monarchy, our gaze falls now on one of history's most decadent and doomed royal houses, the Bourbons of France. Their palaces glittered with gold, their parties shimmered with champagne, but beneath every corset and crown was a suffocating secret, a dynasty rotting from within both morally and medically. By the late 1700s, the French monarchy was already cracking, but the fissures ran deeper than politics or poverty. They ran through the flesh and blood of its future king. Louis Auguste, shy, heavy-set, obsessed with locks and clocks, was never meant to dazzle. When he married the radiant and controversial Austrian Archduchess Marie Antoinette, the match was more political than passionate. The French people were desperate for an heir, but days turned into weeks, weeks into years, and no children came. Whispers soon infected the entire court. Was the queen barren? Was the king incapable? Doctors weighed in. So did pamphleteers, and in the salons of Paris, people spoke of something unspeakable, that the king was anatomically unable to perform. Some suggested phimosis, a condition that left Louis in such pain during arousal that he avoided intimacy altogether. Others accused the queen of coldness, disinterest, or infidelity, but the truth was darker still. Louis may have been physically capable, but emotionally paralyzed. Raised in the shadows of court etiquette, crushed by the burden of kingship, he reportedly struggled with overwhelming anxiety and guilt. He did not know how to be a lover, and in that gap suspicion rushed in like poison. 7 years into their marriage, the queen was finally pregnant. But the timing, the father, some questioned whether Louis had anything to do with it at all. Certain courtiers, especially the suave Swedish Count Axel von Fersen, were seen far too often near the queen's private apartments. Their correspondence, cryptic, coded, and carefully preserved, suggests a romance that may have crossed more than emotional boundaries. By the time the Bastille fell, France had already turned against its queen. Madame Deficit, they called her. The Austrian whore. And when the royal family was dragged to the guillotine, they did not only bleed for their greed, they bled for their secrets. But royal scandal isn't always about sex or succession. Sometimes it's about sickness, disease buried so deep within the bloodline, it begins to unmake the family from the inside out. The Habsburgs, rulers of Spain, Austria, and a vast empire stretching across Europe, were a family consumed by their own blood, literally. Obsessed with purity, they married cousins to cousins, uncles to nieces, again and again, until their family tree curled in on itself like a dying vine. And from that cursed root was born Charles II of Spain, the last of his line. A tragic monarch whose very body told the story of centuries of incest. He could not speak properly. He could not chew food. His tongue was too large, his jaw grotesquely deformed. His mind, at times lucid, at times lost, struggled to comprehend the empire he was supposed to command. Doctors tried to explain it away, priests performed exorcisms, but none could reverse what generations of inbreeding had wrought. Charles's autopsy revealed a heart the size of a walnut, black lungs, a single testicle, and no blood in his body. His death marked not just the end of a king, but the extinction of a dynasty. And from his grave grew a war that would redraw the map of Europe. The War of the Spanish Succession was not fought over power. It was fought over genetic collapse, the horrifying legacy of one family's desire to preserve its blood, until that blood could no longer carry life. And yet, even the darkest royal tragedies can find echoes in unlikely places. In Imperial Russia, in the final decades of the Romanov dynasty, another hidden illness would quietly destroy the last czar's grip on power. Hemophilia, the royal disease, had entered the bloodline through Queen Victoria, whose descendants married into nearly every major house in Europe. Alexandra, wife of Tsar Nicholas II, carried the gene unknowingly, and when their only son Alexei was born with the condition, it changed the course of history. One bruise could kill him. One fall could cause days of bleeding. Desperate to save their heir, the Romanovs turned to a mystic, Grigory Rasputin. He was filthy, he was feared, but he had power. Somehow, inexplicably, his presence seemed to calm the boy's pain, and so the Tsarina clung to him. Against all logic, against all advice, ministers begged her to send him away. The people loathed his influence. but she believed Rasputin was the only thing standing between her son and the grave. In time, the Russian people came to believe that Rasputin ruled through the Tsarina, that the empire had fallen under a spell. Assassins tried to poison him, stab him, drown him. It took bullets to finally end his life, but the damage was already done. The Romanovs had lost the faith of their people, and when the revolution came, it came not just for a regime, but for a family whose secrets had become their shackles. Nicholas, Alexandra, and their children were executed in the dead of night. The boy who was supposed to save the monarchy died alongside it. His blood, the blood that could not clot, spilled into the earth, as if history itself refused to let the royal line heal. These were not isolated scandals. They were symptoms of something far deeper, a centuries-long sickness born of vanity, fear, and pride. Monarchs who would rather gamble an empire than admit weakness. Queens who bore children in silence while the world questioned their virtue. Dynasties that turned inward to protect themselves, only to rot from the inside out. We tell ourselves that kings and queens are chosen, ordained, exceptional, but behind the crowns and portraits lie the same human flaws. Lust, pain, betrayal, denial, magnified by power and passed down like a curse. These are not fairy tales. These are the truths that history tried to hide. And now that the veil has been lifted, we are left with a question older than monarchy itself. What is a royal legacy really worth if it's built on lies no one dared to speak?